There's a particularly selfish group of criminal offences which are devastating to new businesses, but which also many people commit without even realising, although they will have carried out all of the elements of the offence, and so they would be guilty of the offence if they were prosecuted for it. I'm talking, of course, about retail or consumer fraud, which I'll explain in this video in more depth, but I'll distinguish it from the standard rules by which you can return something, because there are some fairly strict rules that traders must abide by to allow consumers to return things. I'll explain those as well. Perhaps I'll start with those. The starting point is if you buy something online, you want to return it. You can do so within 14 days, and there doesn't have to be anything wrong with the item. You won't always get back the shipping costs for the product as long as it's stated clearly by the trader. And if it's something like shoes and you've worn them, you've dirtied them, or if it's clothing and you've dirtied that, they can make a deduction for the use of the product because it's soiled and it's been used. But otherwise, there doesn't need to be anything wrong with it. You might have just changed your mind. This is sometimes referred to as a cooling off period. The 14-day period starts the day after you receive it and replaces the old distance selling regulations. There is also the first 30 days within which you have, as a consumer, the right to reject goods if they don't conform to the contract, which includes all of the terms implied by the Consumer Rights Act, as well as any terms in the contract with the trader. The Consumer Rights Act terms being that it must be satisfactory quality, fit for purpose, and so on. And so within that first 30 days, you can reject it and have your refund. After that 30 days, the rules change, but I'm not going to go into that because this is not purely a consumer video. This is based on what the offences are that we often see, and I've had a few examples sent to me just recently, of flat-out consumer fraud. Let me give you a few examples. Some new businesses, they include candle businesses, they include bespoke items that are made for each customer, or different things that are packaged together or customized in some sort of way and sent to the customer. The customer receives it, and that is evidenced by way of shipping note, delivery note, and tracking and so on. But the customer says they didn't receive it. However, on the dispute with the trader, they say, well, it was sent, you did receive it, it was tracked, and you have received it. The customer then says, well, no, I didn't. They go to their card issuer, their bank, usually, and say that I didn't receive it, product not received, and I want my refund. More often than not, in our experience, dealing with clients that have had these issues, which can amount to thousands of pounds across a number of different customers, or indeed thousands of pounds for a single order in some cases. In the vast majority of cases, the card issuers will talk to the merchant, which is the company that takes the money from the card for the trader. They talk to each other, and invariably they resolve it in favour of the card issuer and the card holder. In other words, the trader loses out, even though they've provided evidence that they've delivered these goods to the customer. Now, in that scenario, make no mistake, that is a case of fraud, where the customer on the receiving end has received the goods, but declares to the card issuer for their chargeback process that they've not received the goods. But in some cases that have been sent to us, I can't mention any names because it will give away who it is, but in some fairly prominent cases that have been brought to us, those customers have been seen and photographed and even showing themselves wearing said products or using said products on their social media accounts. And these are quite unique products. So that quite clearly means and evidences that they have received and are using these products for which they have now received back their money under a false declaration that they didn't receive it. Now, the Fraud Act of 2006 provides a very broad, very simple definition of fraud. That is where somebody makes a dishonest statement in order to make a gain for themselves or cause a loss to somebody else. And in most of these cases, it's both. It is a gain to themselves of the product and a loss to the trader of the value that they've paid and been refunded for that product. Now, many of these traders think that there's nothing they can do about it, and most of those customers think they get away with it. But there is a mechanism for which these traders can do something about it. And that is even if the police are not interested, because I've had at least 3 or 4 cases quite literally in the last 24 hours sent to me where the police are not interested. The police say it's a civil matter, despite all of the Prime Minister's and his cabinet's assurances that the police are going to investigate every crime and follow everything up. In our experience, they don't. The police don't follow everything up. We've had, as I've done videos of, if I find the links to them, I'll put them in the description below, where people have had cars stolen, they've had mobile phones stolen, and they've managed to track them to the location and give the police a pinpointed location as to where their stolen goods are. And the police don't do anything about it. They say, we can't go and investigate. And I disagree, because the police can go and get a warrant from a magistrate if they broadly fulfill 2 criteria: that an offence has been committed and they're likely to find evidence of the offence at that particular address. And in those cases, they should be able to get a warrant. They just don't have the time, or if I'm less charitable, they can't be bothered. But most likely they don't have the time, because the police are undersourced, underfunded, and in my view, of course, and need more funding, need more officers, need more resources, and then they can follow up every offence. So in the event that the police do not follow up these events, all is not lost for the trader. And every consumer watching that does this kind of thing, you probably know who you are. Your days are numbered, because there is a mechanism. Even if the police are not interested, there is a mechanism for these traders to do something about it. And for a more in-depth video on how to do something about it, I will link to our other channel, Art of Law, in the description below. A great video upcoming. It's not live just yet as I'm recording, but it probably will be by the time I release this video, by our own learned friend Alan Robertshaw, on how to bring a private prosecution. Now, what is a private prosecution? I'll leave most of the details to Al, because he's already done the video. But in short, it is any prosecution that is brought not by the CPS, which is the state prosecutorial body. Think Royal Mail. They prosecute their own staff sometimes for stealing internally goods and packages and things like that. The RSPCA bring prosecutions for people that have been torturing animals, for example. And courier companies, large national courier companies, without naming any of them, because I know of the internal dealings and so I can't really comment. But I do know that some of those also carry out their own private prosecutions of their own staff for fraud, for theft, and so on. And so a private prosecution, whilst it can ultimately be taken over by the CPS and either continued by the CPS or closed down by the CPS, they retain that authority. But apart from that, proceeds like a normal prosecution. And it proceeds on the same test for prosecutors, that being a 2-part test. Evidentially, is it possible to bring enough evidence to court to uphold a prosecution? And secondly, is it in the public interest to bring this prosecution? And most offences of dishonesty, of which fraud is one, which is an indictable offence, most of them will be in the public interest to prosecute. So if you as a trader, if you are a trader watching this video, and if you're a consumer doing this, be warned, but if you're a trader doing this and you feel that you are being taken advantage of, and there are certain customers that are defrauding your company, and if there's a certain amount above which you just simply cannot let stand, and you would like to do something about it, there is a mechanism for you to bring a private prosecution. It used to be called laying an information. Now it is more an application for summons or for arrest for offences committed. And you detail everything about the offence and why you say the offence has been committed. If a magistrate on that application agrees with you that there is an offence on the papers, and on your representations being committed, then they will authorize a prosecution. They will issue a summons, and the person that you've named as the prospective defendant will be summoned to court and prosecuted. Only you will be the prosecutor, not the CPS. And this is inherently complex, so it is not a straightforward process, but it is certainly a possible process. But you undertake the process of the person in charge of disclosure and all sorts of other things. So in short, you would have to disclose any evidence, whether it is supporting your prosecution or against your prosecution. And you adhere to all of the same tests. And the test for disclosure, very broadly speaking, is anything that could possibly assist the defense, the prospective defendant, or undermine your prosecution case. And so, as I said, there's a couple of videos on this that I will link to. Firstly, the Art of Law video by our Robert Shaw, which I'll link in the description below. And if I can find one, there's another one by our now King's Counsel, at the time of recording Queen's Counsel, Stephen Harvey, who did a talk on exactly this, and I will try to find that video as well. So these sort of offences are not just limited to someone that said that they didn't receive something, when in fact they did receive something. They can also amount to things where, let's say you have an old item and it's now broken, not working, and somebody has the genius idea to buy a new one and then swap them out. Well, a lot of those items will have serial numbers and can be easily traced as to which one it was that you sent back. And if the one that you sent back was in fact purchased a year and a half before, and you've sent it back as the one that you just bought within your cooling off period, let's say, that would also be fraud, because sending something back as though it was a return of the new one, when in fact it's an old one that you've used and broken, is quite plainly a fraudulent act. And whilst many companies won't do anything about it, we do hear of more companies doing something about it. And indeed, if you are thinking of doing this as a trader, but you don't want to do it all yourself, there are companies out there that are set up purely to assist you in doing this. We as a firm have been involved in a number of private prosecutions in the past, but there are companies set up purely and as a specialist arm of their business to run private prosecutions. You might think, well, what is there in it for them? Well, if a prosecution does go ahead, then obviously there are costs involved, and costs are reclaimed from central funds. Central funds being the court central fund account, out of which those costs are paid, even if the prosecution is not successful, even if the defendant is found not guilty, either at the magistrate's court or the Crown Court even, because private prosecutions can go to the Crown Court. But let's say they are found not guilty. Those prosecutions are still deemed to be a successful prosecution in the sense that it went ahead, not necessarily that they were found not guilty. It was still a valid prosecution. And so those funds can be claimed back. And that is what these firms are set up to do. Not only that, if there is a potential, and there usually is a potential parallel civil claim going alongside any criminal case. For example, I've spoken before of criminal damage. There's obviously the criminal act of damaging something, and alongside it, the civil recovery of the damages for whatever's been damaged. Those two can run parallel side by side. As a caveat, you cannot bring one just to support the other. That cannot be the only reason. It must stand on its own merits. However, it doesn't take a stretch of the imagination to understand that if someone is successfully prosecuted, or even if they're not successfully prosecuted, if they are just prosecuted and found not guilty, you could still run a civil claim and assert on the balance of probabilities the fact that a prosecution was authorized. On the balance of probabilities, they did commit the offence, even if they were found not guilty. That's one of the quirks of the civil system, it is a lower standard of proof. It is on the balance of probabilities rather than so that the magistrate or the jury are sure that this happened. So they could even be found not guilty in a criminal court, and you could assert on your case that you assert that they were in fact guilty of that offence because they were prosecuted. And on the balance of probabilities, they are more likely than not to be guilty if they've been prosecuted, because otherwise it wouldn't have met the test for prosecutors, as in the evidential test and the public interest test. So I hope you found that interesting, because this is not something that is widely spoken of, because most traders feel that there is nothing they can do about this. They receive all sorts of fraudulent claims against their company and feel that there's nothing they can do about it. And it is a growing trend we see. Whilst I often speak on consumer issues and I often support consumers and consumer law, as you've seen in my videos, there is always two sides to this. And so this video is sort of the other side, but it's also a warning to consumers if you even think about engaging in that sort of activity, which is inherently dishonest. So I hope that has been educational to everybody. I hope it's been interesting to everybody. If you want to follow up this discussion with how you would actually bring a private prosecution, check out Al's video linked below. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.